The young woman beside him did not even turn her head. She simply raised her hand, palm flat, fingers together, and said, "No, thank you." Then she picked up her glass of red wine and looked straight ahead, as if the most dangerous man in Italy was a mild inconvenience she had already moved past. Lorenzo Calvani went very still. He was 36 years old. He ran the most powerful criminal organization in Northern Europe: shipping, finance, enforcement, silence. Bank directors rehearsed what they would say before his calls. Men who had crossed him had a way of becoming unavailable. He had taken over the Calvani family at 28, after his older brother was shot outside a restaurant in Verona, and in the 8 years since, no one had managed to take a single thing from him. Not territory, not money, not dignity. Until tonight, when a woman in a burgundy dress raised her hand without looking at him. He smiled. He stood. He nodded once and walked away. The bartender watched from the corner of his eye. The two men at the corner table who had arrived with Lorenzo and were not drinking their drinks looked at each other and said nothing. The room did something rooms do not usually do. It breathed out. The woman did not notice any of it. She finished her wine, set a tip on the bar, and left. Her name was Aria Ventresca. She was 25, a forensic accountant at a compliance firm called Veritech Partners, and she had spent the last 3 days buried in a transaction file that did not add up. She had finally written her report that morning, filed it cleanly, and come here to let her brain go still. She had no idea that the report she filed that morning had already put a target on her back. She had no idea that the most dangerous man in Italy had just decided she was interesting. And she had no idea that in exactly 1 week, she would be sitting across a desk from him, listening to him tell her in a very quiet voice that she had approximately 72 hours to decide whether she wanted to stay alive. Aria's apartment looked the way her mind worked. Everything had a place, and everything was in it. The kitchen counter held nothing but a coffee machine and 1 ceramic cup. Her bookshelves were sorted by subject, then by year. She had lived there 3 years, and the walls were still white because she had never found a color she trusted enough to commit to. Her friend Bianca had said that once, standing in the doorway with a bottle of wine and a look of cheerful horror. Aria, even prisons of posters. Aria had told her the wine was welcome, and the opinion was not. Bianca had laughed and come inside anyway because that was what Bianca did. Bianca was 26, warm without trying, with curly hair she was always pushing out of her face, and a laugh that arrived before the joke was finished. She was the only person at Veritech who had ever knocked on Aria's office door just to see how she was doing. The only person whose answer Aria had ever waited to hear. They balanced the way 2 people balance when one of them holds the other steady, without either of them saying so. Aria trusted Bianca the way she trusted very few things. Carefully. With conditions she had never spoken aloud. She had learned the cost of trusting without conditions when she was 16. Her father had run a small import business with a partner named Gallo. Gallo came to Sunday dinners. Called Aria's mother by her first name. Once helped Aria with a school project about trade routes because he said he knew the subject well. He did know it well enough to drain the company accounts over 18 months without her father seeing it until the morning the bank called, and that morning became the last ordinary morning they ever had. Her father never recovered. Her mother worked 2 jobs for 4 years and said nothing to protect Aria, who found out anyway because she was the kind of girl who found things out. She had been studying accounting ever since. Not because she loved numbers. Because numbers did not lie the way people did. Numbers left a trail. Numbers could be followed back to the source and made to confess. She believed in the systems that govern money with the kind of belief that has never been tested hard enough to break. She locked her door that Friday night, checked it once, and went to bed thinking about the Meridian South file, how cleanly she had written the report, how satisfying it was to do a difficult thing correctly and hand it to someone you trusted to take it from there. She had no idea she had just handed a loaded gun to the man pointing it at her. The Meridian South file had come on a Wednesday, routed through standard intake like any other account review. A logistics company registered in Lugano, moving freight between Southern Europe and North Africa. On paper, ordinary. Aria spent 2 full days with it. The numbers were clean in the way that numbers are clean when someone has worked very hard to make them look that way, which is a different thing entirely from numbers that are actually clean. The transaction chain was small. A recurring transfer, modest in size, cycling through 3 shell entities before landing in an operating account that should not have needed outside funding at all. The kind of thing that only made sense if the money was not really about logistics. She documented it carefully. Precise, unemotional language. Every supporting record attached. She submitted the report to her senior partner Marco Tully's review queue on Friday morning, before she left for the bar. She felt good about it. The specific satisfaction of a person who has done a difficult thing correctly and can now put it down. By Sunday she had not heard from Marco, which was normal. Review responses came Mondays. She made coffee, read her notes, and went to bed at 10. She came home Monday to find her apartment had been visited. She knew before she crossed the threshold. The door was locked, the key turned the same way it always did, but something was different, and the part of her brain that noticed small things noticed it immediately. She stepped inside and stood still. The books on the second shelf were in the right order but pushed back an extra centimeter, as if someone had pulled them forward and replaced them without measuring. The folder on her desk was closed, but its edge was not flush with the corner the way she always left it. The ceramic cup in the kitchen had been moved 2 centimeters to the left. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. Whoever had been inside had been careful and unhurried and completely unconcerned about whether she would notice, as if the visit was not a warning but simply a verification of something they already knew. She picked up her phone and called Marco. He answered on the second ring, warm and steady as always, told her the report looked thorough and he'd have notes by the end of the week. She thanked him, said goodnight, set her phone face down on the desk. She had no way of knowing that the call she had just made was the most dangerous thing she had done all day. Because Marco Tully's had not read her report. He had already forwarded it to the people she was building a case against, and now they knew her name, her address, and exactly how close she had gotten. Marco called her into his office Tuesday morning. His door was already closed when she arrived. His assistant Petra, who had worked at Veritech for 11 years and always had something small to say when Aria passed her desk, did not look up. Aria knocked and went in. The office was orderly and warm. A framed photograph of Marco's 2 daughters on the credenza. A view of the city that turned golden in the afternoons. He was standing when she entered, which he did not usually do, and he smiled the moment she came through the door, which was wrong, because Marco's smiles were usually a response to something, and this one was waiting for her before she had said a word. He gestured to the chair and sat at the same time she did. He said her name the way adults say the names of younger people they are about to disappoint gently. I've been looking at your caseload. I think we've been pushing you too hard. Aria said she felt fine. You're doing excellent work. That's exactly the problem. You take everything seriously, and you don't know when to step back. He paused, the pause of a man choosing words he has already chosen. The Meridian South account is going to Donati's team. Coverage decision. Nothing more. They have more bandwidth for the kind of ongoing monitoring that client needs. Aria asked if there was a problem with her report. Your report was thorough. As always. He leaned forward. Take Thursday and Friday. Go somewhere. Read something that isn't a balance sheet. You've earned it. I mean that. She thanked him. She meant it. She picked up the blank notepad she'd brought out of habit and walked out, already thinking about Bergamo, about sleeping past 7 for the first time in months. She felt the lightness of a person who has been told by someone they respect that they are allowed to rest. Inside his office, Marco waited until her footsteps faded. Then he took a second phone from his jacket pocket, smaller, older, unconnected to the firm's system, and typed a short message. He read it once. He sent it. He put the phone away, straightened his desk, and went back to work with the calm expression of a man who has just handled something that needed handling. In that moment, Aria was 3 floors up looking at train schedules. She had spent 4 years trusting every case she ever built to a man who had been selling the results to the people she was building them against. Every report, every finding, every name, all of it, gone before it ever reached anyone who could act on it. She did not take the long weekend. Thursday morning, kitchen table, personal laptop, her own copies of the Meridian South notes, kept outside the firm's system through a habit she had never examined closely enough to understand was instinct. She went back through the transaction chain, this time not as a compliance analyst writing for a review queue, but as someone trying to understand what she was actually looking at. The more she looked, the less she liked it. By midday, she had made a decision. She would go to the police. The Financial Crimes Unit operated out of a building on Via Moscova. She arrived at 2 in the afternoon with a printed copy of her findings in a plain folder and the composed expression she used in client meetings when she needed to seem calmer than she was. The detective who took her case was named Ferretti. Mid-40s, broad-faced, unhurried manner of someone who had heard many things and been surprised by very few. He listened without interrupting. Asked 3 questions, all precise, all showing he had understood exactly what she was describing. He took the folder, made notes on a yellow pad, told her she had done the right thing by coming in. His handshake at the door was firm. His eye contact was steady. Aria walked out and stood on the pavement in the afternoon light feeling, for the first time since she had come home to find her apartment touched, like the ground was solid again. She went to the cafe across the street. Dark wood, low lighting. Window seat. Macchiato. She sat with the relief of a person who has handed something heavy to the right person and can now straighten up. She was watching a tram move through the intersection when she saw him. Ferretti was sitting at a table near the back of the cafe. Not in uniform. Dark jacket, leaning slightly forward. Across from him was a man she recognized, not from life, but from a company registration document attached to one of the Meridian South shell entities. A man named Ruggieri, listed as a non-executive director of a holding company that existed on paper and nowhere else. They were not eating. They were not strangers. They were 2 men in the middle of a conversation that had been going on for some time. Aria did not move. She sat with her untouched coffee growing cold and understood, with the slow, total clarity of a person watching a familiar building come apart brick by brick, that she had just handed her evidence to the wrong person, and that the wrong person had already known exactly where to find her. She had been in Ferretti's office for 45 minutes. He had her name, her firm, her findings, and her printed folder. And then he had walked directly across the street to the man whose name appeared in those findings and sat down. 45 minutes. That was how long it had taken for the system to turn around and look at her. She spent the weekend inside her apartment with the door locked and her phone face up on the table. She did not sleep either night. She ran the numbers in her head the way she always did when something was wrong, trying to find the edge of the problem, the place where it became containable. She could not find it. Monday morning she arrived at the office before anyone else and walked to her desk with the focus of a person who has decided the best response to a dangerous situation is to behave as if it is not one. The conference room door was open. She saw him before he showed that he saw her. Lorenzo Calvani was sitting in the chair directly across from where her own chair would be, not at the head of the table, not in a position of dominance, but on equal ground, waiting. His jacket was dark. His hands were folded on the table. He was looking at the window. He turned when she stopped in the doorway. His expression was the same one she remembered from the bar. Not a smile, not a threat, just a steady, watchful attention, the kind that belongs to people who have learned that patience is more powerful than pressure. "You need to sit down," he said. "You need to explain how you got into a locked building," she said. "The same way most things get into places they shouldn't." "Someone let me in." He told her that Meridian South was not a logistics company. It was a financial pipeline, one of several that Eduardo Mancini's organization used to move money generated by a procurement network operating across 4 countries. He told her what the network procured. He said it plainly, without softening it. He said the number 17. He did not explain what 17 meant. He watched her face while she understood it on her own. He told her that her report had flagged a transaction Mancini's financial team had spent 8 months burying. The flag had been noticed within 6 hours of her submission. He told her Ferretti had been on Mancini's payroll for 2 years. He told her she had approximately 72 hours before the people who had searched her apartment decided that retrieving the information was no longer the priority, and managing the person who held it became the more practical solution. He placed a card on the table in front of her chair. A number. Nothing else. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. "You raised your hand at the bar," he said. "I thought that was interesting. I still do." He left. Aria stood in the empty conference room and looked at the card. She did not pick it up. Through the glass wall, she could see Bianca arriving at her desk, dropping her bag, shaking rain from her hair, grinning at something on her phone. Completely unaware that 10 meters away, the world the two of them moved through every day had just shown Aria exactly what was underneath it. She left the card where it was. She told herself it was a boundary. She told herself that picking it up would mean accepting something she was not yet ready to accept, that the systems she had always believed in were so completely broken that a criminal was now her most reliable option. She was not ready to accept that. Not yet. She went to find Bianca at lunch. Bianca was eating at her desk the way she always did near a deadline, a container of pasta balanced on top of a stack of folders, her curly hair held back with a pen she had forgotten was there. She looked up and immediately offered half the pasta, which Aria declined. Then she looked more closely at Aria's face and put the container down. What happened? Aria had prepared for this. She said nothing had happened. She was just tired. But she wanted Bianca to be a little careful for the next few days. She kept it vague on purpose. No mention of Lorenzo, Meridian South, Ferretti, or the card on the conference room table. She told herself she was protecting Bianca by keeping her at a distance from it. Bianca looked at her for a long moment, the patience of someone who knows they are not being told the whole truth and is deciding whether to push. Then she smiled, smaller and more careful than usual.
"Aria,
You've been doing everything alone for so long that you think being vague is the same as being kind." Aria said she was fine and would explain more when she could. She walked away. She did not see the expression on Bianca's face as she left, the particular sadness of a person who cares about someone who will not let them close enough to help. That evening, Aria went home and lay in the dark, running the numbers, looking for the edge of the problem. She could not find it. Tuesday morning. Bianca's desk was empty. Before 9, this was not unusual. By 9:15, slightly unusual. By 9:30, Aria called her cell. 4 rings. Voicemail. Bianca's voice, cheerful, ordinary, recorded on some normal day that was nothing like this one. Aria was about to hang up when she heard it. Underneath the beep, in the half-second before the recording ended, a room. A presence in it. And then a man's voice, low and close, saying to someone who was not on the phone, "Siedity. Sit down." The voicemail ended. Aria pulled the phone from her ear and looked at it. Then she stood up, walked back to the conference room, picked up Lorenzo's card from the table where it had sat untouched since yesterday morning, and dialed the number before she had finished deciding to. This was the cost of the vagueness. This was the cost of the boundary. Bianca had been careful for exactly the number of hours Aria had waited to ask for help, and it had not been enough. He answered on the first ring. He did not say hello. "I know about Bianca." Those 4 words told Aria everything about how long he had been waiting for this call, and exactly how precisely he had calculated when she would make it. He told her to leave through the service exit on the ground floor. A car would be at the end of the side street in 4 minutes. She took her bag, walked past Bianca's empty desk without looking at it, and left. The car was a dark blue sedan. Lorenzo was in the back seat. He looked at her face, then forward, and began talking in the quiet, factual way she was starting to understand was simply how he communicated things that other people would have softened. Bianca was being held at a property outside Lodi, a house Mancini's organization used for exactly this kind of situation. She was not harmed. She was detained, and Lorenzo said that word with a weight that made clear he understood how narrow the distance between those two things actually was. The only way to end it was to move before Mancini's team made their decision about Aria. Once the evidence reached the right prosecutor and the network became public, holding Bianca would shift from useful to catastrophic. They would release her because keeping her would add 30 years to every sentence in the room. But it had to happen fast, and it had to happen completely, which meant the evidence Aria had already built needed to be combined with a second set of records held in a private vault at Mancini's estate outside Bergamo. Records that would make the full picture legally unimpeachable. Aria listened to all of it, and then said Marco's name. Lorenzo looked at her for a moment.
3 years, he said.
Every account you worked, every report you submitted. He reviewed it before it went anywhere. The ones that got close to Mancini's structure were reassigned or buried. The ones that didn't were allowed through, because they were useful for appearances. Aria sat with that. She thought about the cases she had been proud of. The ones she had stayed late for. The ones she had told Bianca about over Tuesday lunches as evidence that the job meant something. She thought about Marco sitting across from her with his hands folded, telling her the numbers always told the truth eventually, and the job was simply to wait them out. She had believed him.
Completely.
For 4 years. The belief had felt like wisdom. It was actually just the comfort of a person being managed carefully by someone who needed her competent but contained. Good enough to be credible. Not dangerous enough to be a threat. Until she was. How much of what I built is real? She asked. Lorenzo did not answer immediately. Which was its own answer. Enough to finish this, he said. If you're willing to go and get the rest of it yourself. Aria looked out at the city moving past. She thought about Bianca in a chair in a house outside Lodi, waiting for someone to decide what happened next. She thought about 17 names on a ledger coded as a logistics expense. The version of herself who had always trusted systems over people had just run out of systems to trust. They drove to a building near Navigli with no signage on the front. Inside, a single large room set up as a working space. Laptops, printed maps, 2 men. The first was Teo, early 30s, lean and sharp-featured, with the kind of stillness that belonged to people who were very good at waiting. He glanced at Aria once, professionally neutral, and turned back to his screen. The second was Sandro, older, heavier. A city map of Bergamo province spread in front of him marked with a red pen. When Lorenzo brought Aria to the table, Sandro slid the map toward her without ceremony, as if she had always been part of the plan. Lorenzo walked her through it. The Calvani team had identified a server room on the ground floor of Mancini's estate east of the city. The estate was used as a residence and occasional meeting point, security present, but not at the level of a dedicated facility. The server room held encrypted financial records, internal ledgers, and transfer authorizations that matched the transaction structure in the Meridian South chain. Combined with the compliance documentation Aria had already built, authenticated, submitted by a credentialed forensic analyst, they became the kind of evidence that prosecutors did not need to argue around. They became the case itself. Then came the part she had already known was coming. The records were encrypted in a financial format. A person who pulled the files without understanding the underlying architecture would get noise. Aria would get the truth. Which meant Aria had to be the one to go inside, access the system, and complete the download. The expected window is 15 minutes, Lorenzo said. He told her the risk if something went wrong.
He did not soften it.
Then he stopped and looked at her and said, "You can say no. I want you to understand that." Aria looked at the map, the access route, the timing, the security rotation. "Tell me exactly what the download sequence requires," she said. Lorenzo held her gaze for 1 second and nodded to Sandro, who began to explain. Across the table, Teo was already closing down his screen. But for just a moment, before he turned the laptop away, the image on it was visible. A still frame from a security camera. Grainy, time-stamped 3 weeks earlier. A man standing outside a gate in a residential street. The man in the image was Teo. The gate in the image belonged to the Mancini estate. Neither Lorenzo nor Sandro mentioned it. Aria did not see it. She was already memorizing the download sequence, building the plan in her mind with the focused precision of a woman who had decided, for better or worse, to trust herself. But the image had been there. And what it meant was that someone in this room had already been to that gate 3 weeks before this plan existed. They left Milan before dawn in 2 vehicles, taking separate routes to a rented house on a hillside outside Bergamo. Plain, clean, long view of the valley below. Enough distance from the nearest road that headlights would be visible minutes before they arrived. Teo and Sandro spent the afternoon running final checks. Credentials, drive, security rotation timing, speaking in the shorthand of people who had done versions of this before. Aria spent it at the kitchen table going through the download sequence again until she could run it without thinking, which was the only way she trusted herself to run it under pressure. By evening the work was done. The house became the kind of quiet that sits differently from ordinary quiet because everyone in it knows what the morning holds. Sandro made coffee and stood at the window with his back to the room. Teo sat with his phone, not visibly doing anything, just holding it the way people hold things when they need something in their hands. Lorenzo came and sat across from Aria. For a moment neither spoke. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had been moving fast for days and had, briefly, stopped. Aria spoke first. "Why did you come to find me yourself? You could have taken what I filed and used it without me." "What you filed was a flag, not a case," he said. "The transaction chain you identified means nothing in a courtroom without the person who built it sitting across from a prosecutor and explaining exactly how she found it and why it means what she says it means. A file, without its author, is just paper. You are the evidence." It was a clean answer. A complete answer. The kind that accounts for everything and leaves no room to question it. "You said you remembered the bar," she said. "I did." "What do you remember about it?" He was quiet. The way she had come to understand meant he was deciding how much of the true answer to give. "Most people in that room knew who I was. The ones who didn't know could feel it anyway. You either perform around it or you shrink from it." He paused. "You didn't do either. You just raised your hand, like it was a completely ordinary situation, and I was a completely ordinary problem." "You were an ordinary problem," Aria said. "I was tired, and I wanted to drink my wine." "I know," he said. "That's what I remembered." She looked at him. "Is that admiration?" He held her gaze without blinking for a long moment. "I haven't decided yet," he said. Then he stood, said they should sleep before the morning, and walked down the hall. Aria sat at the table alone, turning the drive over in her hands, and told herself that what she felt was simply the sharpness that comes from being seen clearly by someone unexpected. Nothing more than that. She almost believed it. Down the hall, through the thin wall of the rented house, she heard Teo's voice, very low, speaking to someone on his phone in a murmur too quiet to make out words. The call ended before she could be sure she had heard it at all. She told herself it was nothing. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. She had 6 hours before the morning, and the morning was the only thing that mattered now. She was wrong about it being nothing. She went in at 7:40, the 20-minute window between the end of the overnight shift and the arrival of the day staff, when the estate ran on a single guard at the front gate and one camera sweep every 4 minutes. She was dressed as a service contractor. She carried a bag with the drive, a configured laptop, and credentials Lorenzo's team had embedded into a real company's maintenance schedule. The guard at the gate checked her name against his clipboard. Young, maybe 22, tired eyes, the distracted manner of someone thinking about his bed. He looked at the clipboard, then at her face, then waved her through. She counted seconds between camera sweeps on the path to the service entrance. Keyed in the code. The light turned green. She was inside in under 8 seconds. The server room was at the end of a corridor that smelled of old stone and climate control. Keypad lock.
Code.
Green light. She plugged in the drive, opened the laptop, and started the extraction sequence she had memorized at the kitchen table the day before. The progress bar appeared. It began to move. Lorenzo's voice came through the earpiece, low, steady, confirming she was clear on all external positions. Sandro was on the camera feeds outside the estate wall. Teo was on the road. 20%.
40.
She kept her breathing even and her hands still and watched the numbers climb. At 60%, Lorenzo's voice stopped. Not mid-sentence. Just stopped, the way a radio stops when the signal is cut, leaving a silence that had a different texture from ordinary silence because something was in it. She touched the earpiece. Nothing. Waited 3 seconds. Touched it again. Still nothing. 64%. She looked at the door. She looked at the screen. She made herself stay. 68. 70. 73. The footsteps came at 73%. In the corridor. Unhurried, the footsteps of someone who was not rushing because they did not need to rush. Which was worse than running. 76. She did not pull the drive. She pressed herself back against the server rack and thought about Bianca in a chair in a house outside Lodi. Thought about 17 names on a ledger. Kept her hand away from the drive. 79. 81. The footsteps slowed outside the door. 84. A pause. The specific pause of a person who has stopped because something caught their attention, and the silence that followed was the kind that precedes a decision being made on the other side of a wall she could not see through. 86. 87. The download bar kept moving. She had no way of knowing whether the silence outside meant the footsteps had moved on, or whether someone was already reaching for the door. The door opened. The two men who came through it were not the young, tired guard from the gate. They were older and deliberate, in the plain, dark clothing of people whose job is to be present without being noticed until they need to be. They did not shout. They did not reach for anything. They simply stepped in and positioned themselves, one at the door, one to the left, and the geometry of where they stood made it clear without a word that the exit was no longer available. The man by the door had a phone to his ear and was speaking in a low murmur, reporting in, updating someone on exactly what he was looking at. The other man looked at Aria with the flat professional attention of someone assessing a situation, not a person. His eyes went to the drive in her hand, then to the screen, then back to her face. He did not look angry. He looked patient, which was worse. 91%. Aria did not pull the drive. She kept her body against the server rack and looked back at the man looking at her and did not move. Then Lorenzo's voice came back into her earpiece, fractured, cutting in and out, fighting interference. But there. Teo was made. An hour ago. They knew the approach route. An hour ago. Not a leak that happened this morning. An hour ago, which meant the call she had heard through the wall last night, the murmur too quiet to make out, had not been nothing. Teo had been on the phone with Mancini's people while Aria sat at the kitchen table memorizing the sequence that would walk her directly into a room they would be waiting in. I'm 60 seconds out. Do not move. Whatever happens, do not move from that room. The man by the door lowered his phone, said something low to the other man, who nodded once and took a step toward her. 93%. She looked at the screen. She thought about what 60 seconds meant in a room this size with two men between her and the door, and she made the calculation quickly and without sentiment. The answer was that 60 seconds was a long time. It was also possibly the only time she had. 95. The man was 4 steps away, close enough to see the set of his jaw, the tightening around his eyes, the look of someone who has decided the conversation portion of the situation is finished. She did not step back.
There was nowhere to step back to.
She stood exactly where she was with the drive in her hand and her eyes on the screen and thought about a bar in Milan and a hand raised flat without hesitation. That moment had felt like control when it was actually just a woman who did not know what she was saying no to. This time she knew exactly what she was saying no to. 97. The man reached out and closed his hand around her wrist. Firm and practiced, the grip of someone who had held unwilling people in place before and knew how to do it without leaving marks. Aria did not pull away. She looked at the screen. 98. 99. The door at the far end of the corridor hit the wall with a sound like a gunshot, and Lorenzo Calvani came through it, and the number on the screen reached 100, and the drive was complete, and whatever happened next, the evidence was real and finished, and nobody in any room anywhere could take that back. What happened in the next 60 seconds was not something Aria could fully reconstruct afterward. She remembered Lorenzo moving through the room with a speed and certainty that left no space for argument. The man who had been holding her wrist releasing it and stepping back in the way people step back when they understand the calculation has changed. She remembered pulling the drive from the port and closing the laptop and pressing both against her chest. She remembered a second team coming in from the eastern side of the estate, people she had never met who moved through the building like they had memorized its bones, and then Sandro's voice in her ear. Bianca was out. She was standing in a courtyard in the cold morning air.
Confused. Frightened.
But upright. Unhurt. Aria leaned against the server rack and let out a breath that had been building for 6 days. The drive was in her hand. Bianca was out. The rest was paperwork, which was the only battlefield she had ever been trained for, and the one she trusted most. She spent the following week reconstructing her compliance documentation from her personal notes and the records she had kept outside the firm's system, combining them with the vault download into a single evidence package. Clean, sourced, formatted for legal submission. She delivered it personally to the office of an international financial crimes prosecutor named Vasquez. A woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the manner of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of file for exactly this long. Vasquez read the summary while Aria sat across from her and did not speak until she had finished. Then she looked up. "How long did this take you to build?"
"For years," Aria said.
Without knowing it, 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, 2 officers from the Financial Crimes Unit entered Veritech Partners and arrested Marco Tellez at his desk. He was reviewing files when they came in, the same way he was always reviewing files. He looked up with his professional composure fully in place. Then he saw their credentials, and the composure left his face in the specific way that composure leaves the face of a person who has been preparing for a moment and finds, when it arrives, that no amount of preparation was actually enough. The entire open plan office watched him stand, put on his jacket, and walk to the door between the 2 officers. He did not look at anyone as he left. Ferretti was suspended by the end of the same week. Mancini was indicted on 17 counts within the month, and his network, which had survived for 11 years on the principle that money could silence anything, began to come apart within 48 hours of the indictment. Because financial evidence does not lose its nerve. It does not change its story. It simply sits there and tells the truth until everyone in the room has heard it. Bianca came back to work on a Wednesday. She walked in, put her bag down, pushed her curly hair out of her face, and looked at Aria across the open office with an expression that carried everything she did not have words for yet. Then she nodded once, slowly, and sat down. Aria nodded back. 6 weeks after Bergamo, on a Friday evening, Aria walked into Cielo Oscuro and sat at the same seat she had occupied on the night all of this began. The same amber light. The same bottles behind the bar. She ordered a glass of Barolo and said nothing to anyone. Lorenzo came in 20 minutes later. Same seat.
Same drink. He did not speak.
The bartender moved to the other end of the bar without being asked. The room did not exhale this time. There was no collective held breath, no ripple of awareness moving through the space the way it had moved 6 weeks ago. He was simply a man sitting beside a woman at a bar, which was all it had ever been on the surface, and something else entirely underneath. They sat in silence for a moment that had the weight of every chapter between the first time and this one. Then Aria picked up her glass, turned it slightly in his direction, and took a slow sip, eyes forward, hand steady. The gesture said everything the story had been building toward without using a single word to say it. The office is quiet on a Wednesday afternoon in November, the kind of quiet that happens after a verdict. Aria sits at a new desk in a new building, the Financial Crimes Unit of the European Prosecutor's Office, where she has worked for 3 months and where no one calls her an analyst because her title is something different now, something with more weight in it. The file in front of her is a preliminary referral. A young man, 24, is sitting across from her. He works at a mid-tier consultancy in Rome. He has brought documents without being asked to bring them, which means he has already spent time being afraid, and the fear has made him honest before the room required it. He has found something in an account he was assigned. He explains it carefully, earnest, and a little too precise, the way young people are precise when they have rehearsed something important and need it to come out right. As he speaks, Aria can see the whole shape of what he has brought her. It is real. It is also considerably more dangerous than he understands, because the account he is describing has names attached to it that she recognizes, names with long arms and good lawyers, and a long history of making problems dissolve before they reach a courtroom. She could tell him, it looks thin. She could tell him the referral process is backed up, and these things take time. She could use the language of bureaucracy to place what he has brought in a drawer somewhere, the way things get placed in drawers, the way she now understands they have always been placed in drawers by people who believed they were simply managing the complexity of the system.
She does not do that.
She sets down her pen. She tells him what she is going to do with what he has given her and why, and what will likely happen next, and what he should prepare for. She tells him the truth about the people attached to the account and what that means for him personally, plainly, without softening the edges, because softened edges are what got her here in the first place. He nods. His hands are still on the table. He looks the way she must have looked once, on a Thursday afternoon on Via Moscova, believing he had just handed something heavy to the right person. She hopes she is the right person. She intends to be. She picks up her pen and begins. The systems that are supposed to protect us are only as honest as the people inside them. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to become the drawer. Thank you for staying until the end of this one. It was a long journey, and you made it all the way through. If this story stayed with you, share it with one person who needs it. Maybe someone who's questioning whether the right thing is still worth doing. Maybe someone who just needs to be reminded that one honest person can change the shape of a room. Like, comment, and subscribe to Arden Tells Tales. Every story here is made for people who still believe in the one that comes next.